Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining. You may have noticed that your usual moderator, Bernadine, is actually a panelist this time around. So I'm honored that Bernadine has asked me to serve as moderator today. My name is Jason Bailey. Some of you might know me as Art Gnome. So I write about art and tech for a blog called artgnome.com. I've been pretty passionate about NFTs for the last 4 years, one of the first big collectors, and have been passionate about museums my whole life. So I basically grew up in museums, and never more so than during COVID did I realize just how important museums are to me when I started going through sort of withdrawals. So today's topic kind of brings together two things that I care a lot about. And I think NFTs can be used in a lot of different ways with museums. I don't think that there's any one thing or one way to use them. So I know there are a lot of folks that maybe are suspicious of how NFTs may interact with museums. I'd ask that you try to keep an open mind. I think the panelists today have really been thoughtful about how they're approaching this. And I'm personally excited to hear more about what they've done here with NFTs and the Whitworth. So with that, I would like to have the panelists each sort of give them their brief introduction, and then we'll move into slides. So maybe we'll start with Alistair.
Yeah, hi Jason, and hello everybody. I'm Alistair Hudson, and I'm director of the Whitworth Art Gallery, which is part of the University of Manchester. And I'm also director of the Manchester Art Gallery, which is the main civic art gallery in the city centre.
Thank you, Alistair. And then Poppy Bowers.
Hi, everybody. I'm Poppy Bowers. I'm exhibition curator at the Whitworth, where I work along with Alistair. And yeah, it's brilliant to be here today. Thanks for everyone for joining on such a hot day.
Thanks, Poppy. And then Bernadine, of course.
Hi, everyone. You might recognize me. I'm Bernadine. I'm the CEO of Vastari and also the newly formed Vastari Labs.
Awesome. Okay, so with that, we're going to start with some slides, and then we'll be moving into sort of more of a discussion, and want to leave some room for questions at the end. So folks that have questions, please put them into the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can toward the end of the webinar. And with that, I'll hand it over to Alistair.
Thank you, Jason. If we go, first of all, to an image of the Whitworth, I can explain a little bit more about the gallery or museum as a whole. So the Whitworth is part of the University of Manchester. It was founded in 1889 with the wonderful Victorian motto for the perpetual gratification of the people of Manchester. Essentially what that means is the Whitworth was founded as an art gallery, and in fact an art gallery and park with a social agenda. It was not designed to be a comprehensive world museum. It was designed as Manchester was growing as an industrial capitalist centre in the world, as a place which cared for its residents and provided education and well-being in modern days terms for the city's residents, but also to, in a way, instruct them in good design and aesthetics, so that it would power Manchester's cotton industry forward as one of the largest manufacturing centres in the world. So the Whitworth, as a result, has a large collection of around 60,000 works of art, which is still growing. The building was redeveloped in 2015 with this extension by Muma Architects to give us in total about 3,000 square meters of exhibition space, plus collection stores, event space, and reconnectors with this idea of the gallery and park working together. If we could just go to the next slide, I mean, it's probably worth working out that what this means with this idea of a social museum is it's not just a collection like any other. The gallery is really a space of activity, and we program it as such. I think it's also worth pointing out that what we're interested in a way, is using the museum as a space for social change. And if you go to the next slide, I can show you a map here. So in the middle, if you don't know Manchester, this won't make much sense to you. But basically, the Whitworth is in the middle of this map there. To the north is the city centre and university world. To the west is hospital world, so the University Hospital and the main Royal Infirmary for the City of Manchester. And to the south and east of the gallery are the complex, diverse neighbourhoods of Rusholme, Moss Side, Fallowfield, and so on. So really what this means is the gallery is not a city centre art gallery in the traditional sense. This is a gallery which is amongst neighbourhoods. And what we think of is a ways in which the gallery can operate in those neighbourhoods and operate in the city, which is very much about providing ideas, solutions in an aesthetic way to the development of society. And if you just click on the next slide again, underpinning this is the idea of arte util, or art as a tool, a project I've been involved with for a number of years, going back to around 2012, initiated with the artist Tanya Rigera and colleagues at the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven. And this is really an online project which maps case studies around the world where art is being used to make some kind of social transformation happen in actuality, rather than just giving representations of problems or issues in the world. What we're interested in doing is using the museum, its resources now to kind of actively work with people of the city to make change happen. So this is the philosophy that is underpinning the gallery. And therefore all our projects going forward are designed around this idea of how can we use our collections? How can we use art as an idea to infiltrate and to make transformations within all kinds of work, which is not normally the province of art, in healthcare, in city planning, in education, in environment, in all these areas, but to do it in a way that is done with some kind of care and consideration, and where, in a way, museums and galleries start to take part in the real economies of the world. So at that point, I'm probably going to hand over now to Poppy as well, to talk a little bit more about the project we're embarking on, which frames the NFT.
Thank you. Yeah, well, as Alice has just introduced, the sort of driving ideas and values that underpin our activity and our programme at the Whitworth, I thought I would just say a little bit about my role within that as exhibition curator, and to give just some framing as to why we're sat here talking about NFTs today. I mean, as Alice has said, as part of this work towards becoming a socially useful museum, it means rethinking how we make exhibitions and how they might operate. So I wanted to just touch on two very basic but core approaches that underpin our programme going forward. One is changing the topic of our exhibitions, as Alice has just kind of pointed to. We want our exhibitions to be issue-led. They're driven by a set of questions or urgencies that relate to our daily lives, whether that's political, social, economic, environmental issues and struggles that we're all embroiled within in different extents. And this is rooted in where we're working from, primarily in Greater Manchester and the Northwest, but it extends out nationally and internationally to circumstances such as perspectives and experience of globalisation, more recently Brexit, of course, here in the UK and within our, as well as questions and concerns and thinking around climate change. So this can mean taking up subjects that aren't ordinarily taken up in art galleries, as Alistair pointed to, like economics, for example. And the second shift that we're kind of working towards is changing who makes exhibitions at the Whitworth. So we're walking towards a model where exhibitions aren't authored solely by curators and educators at the Whitworth, but which we have been doing for some time, but we're developing and like co-producing and working collaboratively with a whole range of people that come together around a particular set of questions, be it economy, be it education, be it health. And Alistair spoke about how the museum is about being a place of activity. And so part of that is rethinking the exhibition away from that idea of it being a space of a fixed kind of display and actually a kind of open-ended site of socially engaged activity. And the idea that what we look at in an exhibition goes beyond the space of the space itself, and which we'll touch on in this project, so that ideas continue beyond the sort of time frame of an exhibition. So with these two kind of core approaches in mind, we've been developing a strand of thinking around economics, beginning with ideas around the political economy of art. So how art circulates, the conditions in which it is produced, who is represented, how is it distributed, who has access to it. So very pertinent questions for today and for the gallery museum like the Whitworth, which is a building and a collection that's for public use. And so that seeded the idea for a project on economics more broadly. So Economics the Blockbuster is the title of our project. And we talk about it primarily as an action research project, but it will also take the form of an exhibition that will take place at the Whitworth in 2023. And it's been developed collaboratively through conversations with a number of different people, business experts and bankers from the Manchester Business School. We've got City Lab at the Liverpool John Moores University, as well as the Association of Art Util that Alistair has mentioned. A number of artists have been involved in some of our conversations so far, as well as students, our Friends of the Whitworth, which is our patrons group. Volunteers, staff, visitors have all kind of taken part in different moments of roundtable discussions, workshops, etc. So very broadly, the project looks to reclaim economics as more than just financial and commercial networks, and to recognise it also as a set of social relations of which we're all part. And so, as I've said, we've already started working with a number of practitioners to explore alternative economies, so alternative ways of organising our lives differently, not just thinking about the economy of the art world and the art museum, although that's particularly important today, but also extending out to wider ideas around how we live. So our food economies, conditions of work, our relationship to the environment, etc. And I refer to it, or we collectively refer to it as an action research project, because Economics the Blockbuster is evolving through a number of experimental research projects, of which this NFT project is one. So Economics the Blockbuster isn't led by a kind of curatorial thesis from the start, so to speak, but instead is developed and taken shape through live conversations and responses to what is taking place in the world. So the emergence of NFTs as a growing art market and activity became a point that raised really pertinent questions about how art and visual culture might circulate beyond the more typical networks of gallery, auction house, museum store, how collections like the one at the Whitworth might circulate beyond just accumulation and display. So that's led us to kind of the project that we're going to introduce today. And I guess, to say that, one of the thinkings towards this was how we might test new forms of self-generated income for public institutions like the Whitworth, and how we might circulate our collection in new contexts, how we might bring attention to this new digital market, to our gallery audiences and constituents. So all questions that I'm sure will begin to unpack the project as we go.
Great, thanks. And then I think Bernadine, did you have some slides as well?
Yeah, I'm going to be presenting the actual project itself. So thank you so much, Alistair and Poppy, for framing how this NFT project fits within the Whitworth programming. And I'm going to be giving a little bit of, for those of you who might be new to NFTs or thinking about it a little bit, I'm just giving a tiny bit of context of how this NFT fits in the wider environment. So a lot of people have followed the headlines about NFTs, the fact that one sold in March for $70 million at Christie's, that really turned a lot of heads and made people pay attention. But some other interesting things have sold as NFTs recently, including the source code for the World Wide Web by Tim Berners-Lee, and Damien Hirst actually announced that he's also selling an NFT next week. So it's really growing, and it's been a volume of nearly $2.5 billion worth of NFT sales in the first half of 2021. And that is extraordinary, especially if you look at it in comparison with the sales in 2020. If you look at the chart on the right here, you can see how this is an extraordinary jump. And with that extraordinary, those headlines come a lot of negatives as well. As you can see on this slide, there are some worries about the impact of NFTs on the climate. And I'm sure we'll talk about the carbon footprint of NFTs later in this panel. But also museum works have started being used as NFTs. Just backtracking a little bit, an NFT is a non-fungible token, which is basically like a certificate of authenticity for a digital asset. So for the first time, if you own something digital, you can create a record of that can be sold, and it's almost like a deed that you then own in your own personal wallet. And as a result, you can actually support certain causes that might not have physical things to sell, but digital ones, in a way that is disintermediated. You can go direct to whoever created that NFT. And so the way that it works, you mint something, and that digital asset could be anything, right? But it could also be something that you don't own yourself. So this is an example of that, a museum, an organization called Global Art Museum, but they're not really a museum, they're an organization in Singapore, took objects that were in the open domain from museum collections and minted them as NFTs. What was interesting about that occurrence that happened in March was that it was kind of like a heist, because these assets were not really theirs to mint, even though they were in the open domain, in the public domain. I think that what was interesting was that they didn't sell. There was no authenticity to that Global Art Museum selling those works, because they were not the museum themselves. They did not have the approval of the museum. And so then they came out afterwards and said that it was a social experiment and they didn't really mean to hurt anyone with it. We now have a lot of museums that were quite upset about NFTs being minted of their collection without permission. But at the same time, we also saw some museums minting a form of NFTs with their permission. The Uffizi Gallery in Florence actually successfully sold a unique NFT. So that's a one-of-a-kind NFT of certain works of their collection for quite high sums. So this example, a Michelangelo was sold for roughly the equivalent of $170,000 to one donor. We looked at this, and when we were thinking about it, it's really interesting for Economics at Blockbuster to analyze this situation and get involved with the NFTs and think about the economics behind it, but somehow do it with a purpose that was linked to a museum's practice and exhibitions. This was kind of the conversations we were having, and not just minting a JPEG of the collection, but making it mean more than just that. Yes, someone in the chat is sharing a few other examples of museums minting NFTs. Thank you. So then we looked at the collection, and we will come later to talk about why exactly we chose this work. But we've looked at The Ancient of Days by William Blake, which is a print that was hand colored by the artist. And then it was, there are many versions of it, but this one specific to the Whitworth was painted in, hand painted by the artist, reputedly on his deathbed. So it's a really interesting image. And if you want to learn more about the project, you can actually visit the website for this project. It's going to go live next week as a sale. And instead, what we've tried to do is not just mint a JPEG of the work. We've actually minted a different type of image of the work. This is a multispectral image. It is an analysis that's being done. We'll talk about that more in the panel, I'm sure, because of some questions around the Ancient of Days that the Whitworth was researching together with another library, with the John Rylands Research Center and Library at the University of Manchester, to find out the dating of the work. And so this is something that usually happens behind the scenes. It's something people would usually never see, but it's a really beautiful image that represents all the research and thinking that happens within a museum context. So we're minting this as an addition of 50 works. It's not going to be just one of a kind. And two, so there will actually be 52. It'll be 50 works and 2 museum proofs that will stay within the Whitworth wallet. And I tried to choose 4 main interesting facts about the NFT that might be interesting to you, how we tried to make it more significant and tied to the museum practice. The first is that, as Poppy mentioned, this is part of the exhibition's The Blockbuster Project and will be included in the exhibition in 2023 at the Whitworth in some way, depending on what happens. The second is that, of course, it's showcasing the research that's happening behind the scenes that a lot of people don't realize are happening at museums every single day. The third is that there actually is an archival element to this, alongside the NFT that is going to be, well, the series of NFTs that are going to be sold. There will be a not for sale NFT within the Whitworth wallet that is tracking all of the wallets that own the NFT, how the prices change, what secondary sales are done, etc. So that we can track how the life of these 50 NFTs evolves over the next few months and years. And lastly, which references what Alistair was talking about the social purpose of the museum, the sale proceeds from the sale of the NFT, both in the primary sale when these 50 go for sale next week, but also 20% of any future sales will go to the Whitworth Community Fund, which has been specially created for this exhibition, and that will support local projects to the Whitworth in Manchester. We can talk about that more later as well, but basically it's highlighting these 4 elements of what it is to be a museum and using this technology to facilitate that. And yes, it's going to go live on a green platform. Well, we're calling it Green NFTs, Jason. We can, as the founder of greenNFTs.com, I'm sure you can weigh in on this, but it's not being minted on Ethereum, which is the proof of work blockchain that is getting the headlines right now around carbon emissions. It is actually being minted on a proof of stake blockchain called Tezos, and it will be sold on a marketplace called Hicetnunc, that's Latin for here and now, that actually has been seeing more transactions than the biggest Ethereum platforms over the last few months, under the radar without all the big headlines. So it's quite an interesting space, a space where artists have been connecting, where there have been a lot of experimental projects happening, and that is where this NFT will live in the first instance. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen and we can go into the conversation.
Yeah, no, that was a fantastic background. You know, I think it's clear to me that you've put a lot of thought into all the different aspects of the project, and I'm excited to dive in deeper. But having done some of these panels and talked to folks about NFTs, I know sometimes we lose folks right in the beginning because it's not an easy thing to understand what an NFT really even is. And I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, Bernadine, but maybe just take a minute or so just to go a little bit deeper into what an NFT is so that we can make sure everybody kind of has a general idea of what it is we're talking about as we go into the project.
Yeah, I like to talk about 3 main elements of the NFT when I try to explain to people what an NFT is. The first is the digital asset, as I mentioned earlier. That is not saved in the blockchain. It's usually saved on a different server, something which people call the permaweb, which apparently stays in perpetuity. And you host an image that then is linked to from the actual token itself. The token is a blockchain facilitated certificate that the reason that you can trust that it's true within the blockchain is that it's being saved on multiple locations at the same time, and every transaction that's saved saves the next one. So it's very difficult to hack, and you can really be sure that that information within that certificate is verified. It's the same technology that's being used for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. And then the last thing is to think about the wallets. So these certificates are held within the same type of wallets that would hold cryptocurrency. And you can then, without a doubt, know that a wallet created that NFT and a new wallet now owns that NFT. And you can track that process throughout its lifetime with a certain level of certainty.
Yeah, I think that's a great definition. I'm not sure that I have much to add to that. I will say we're early
You are
enough.
the expert, Jason. Tell me if I forgot something.
No, I think you're spot on. I will just say that we're early enough on in the NFT space that, you know, I did a poll on Twitter a couple of days ago asking people whether they think the thing that they bought is the token or the art. Like, how do they, which part, you know, is the collectible? And there are a lot of people that have been in the space for, you know, 4 years or more that disagree with each other still about, you know, what is it that you actually own? And I think that's part of the fun of being in early and experimenting and understanding these things is, you know, part of it is sort of different collectors have different thoughts on how this works. But I think your explanation is one of the best that I've heard so far. So great job. So with that, I'd love to ask, you know, how does this whole thing start? So, you know, Alistair, Poppy, how did you decide to reach out to Vastari? Obviously, if you've read the stories, there are people that are very much pro museums experimenting with NFTs, and there are a lot of people that maybe don't think it's necessarily a good idea or have some fears. So how do you decide to take this on?
Well, we've been developing the Economics to Blockbuster project for over a year, 18 months now. And obviously what we wanted to do was to make the development of the show part of the project and make the financing of the exhibition itself part of the project, so that every aspect of the exhibition when it materializes in 23 is considered through the lens of economics, and that we make all the making part of the process. So we have fun with it in effect, but we make it a real live action experiment. And it so happened that during this process of research, where we're looking at all kinds of ways, you know, talking to banks, talking to philanthropists, talking to social enterprise companies about ways in which we might generate resources, ways in which we might basically think about new economics within the world of art. And it so happened that during this time, the NFT phenomenon exploded. And I'd already known Bernardine and Vastari from being on previous panels and discussions around art world economics, that I think we literally both thought about the same thing at the same time. I think I was thinking, oh, you know, who could we get to help us kind of experiment with an NFT? And I think Bernardine called me and said, oh, have you seen this NFT thing happening? Have you got any ideas? And I said, well, it so happens we have. And then the conversation followed from there. So it's happened very quickly, I have to say. And museum world and university world is not necessarily adept at thinking quickly. And that's been one of the main challenges of the project, even right up to this moment now, as we sort of thrash out some of the kind of finer details of it. But that's really the gestation of the project. But what was important to me was, given that this Wild West was emerging and that we had to capture it, it was very important to me as an art historian by training that as a museum, we captured this phenomenon within the world of art that we were currently experiencing, and it wasn't lost. And in that live situation, for me, the only way to capture that was not to sit on the sidelines and comment, but to dive into the complexities of this thing and get our hands dirty, and to live with it and breathe it. And I think that's the real way to understand something. And a way to do this, perhaps on behalf of the sector, as a university gallery, we sort of have that ability of kind of intellectual freedom and artistic freedom as well, that we can maybe play and experiment and research very openly and very publicly. So this is something I thought we were well primed to do, and that in a way that all that process that now unfolds, in the whole making of this webinar, the website, and whatever happens to this market and to this NFT will all be presented in 2023 as part of the exhibition. Whether it's good or bad, whether the NFT market collapses, something else emerges, it doesn't matter. That we can say we're just basically opening the window to this material. But at the same time, this isn't really just about gaining cultural capital for the institution. This is really important, and not gaining capital for the individual. What I really wanted to do with this project, and Poppy and I have talked about this a lot, is about, in a way, sort of our Robin Hood moment. How can we capture this world of craziness around all this kind of money flying around? How could we redirect some of that into real social capital to make some kind of real changes happen in the world? So whereas the object itself may not be necessarily tangible in the traditional sense, its effects would be.
No, that's brilliant. And I really like that rather than coming in, being 100% on board, like pro NFT, or being afraid of NFTs, which I think a lot of people are, worried about, taking sort of an intellectual or an educational approach to it, and acknowledging that there's still lots of questions out there, and let's experiment and see where this goes, and use as sort of your true north, trying to do social good, right? So I think that's really helpful. Poppy, maybe do you want to talk a little bit more? I know you talked about it on the slides, but just a little bit more about the economics of the blockbuster and how the NFT ties in a bit to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alistair covered it really well by talking about something I didn't mention, which is, yes, the whole kind of financing of the exhibition, and to make that whole infrastructure and economy that's behind exhibitions kind of part of the material of the show. So I think that's really important. And one thing to add is we've set up a web platform that was shown on the slideshow called Decentralizing Political Economies. And it's really a place for us to try and hold some of the conversations and the ideas that we're sort of working through across this broad project. So I'll add a link into the chat so people can have a look at it. But it's kind of unfolding as it goes, and there's videos on there. There's a library with some contributions from various artists, and that's where we hope to kind of track some of the responses and our thoughts and feelings about this NFT project as it unfolds, because we are very much at the beginning of it. We've only just kind of, everything's just slightly got tied together in the last few weeks. As Alistair said, it's been a really time-sensitive project. And so, so there's so much to kind of talk through and unpack, and also to see, I mean, Bernardine, you touched on it, that once this goes out and on sale, that's kind of the first part of that sort of public kind of dissemination, because then we're going to follow how those NFTs are, where they go, if they're resold, how much are they, how many times are they resold, how far do they travel. So all of that information is going to be kind of followed, and we'll reflect on that, financially as well, what will come back through to the gallery from that. And then also those less tangible things, like how does the conversation change within museums around the use of NFTs, or the the engagement with NFTs, with with how we sort of use our collection. There's quite a lot to kind of follow on from this moment on, really.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think because it's a bit of an experiment, it's sort of a living project, right? We don't necessarily, we're not like presenting the results, we're presenting sort of the beginning of it, and there's reasons to sort of stay with it and watch it evolve. Bernardine, from the Vastari side, when did Vastari get involved? And maybe sort of as a follow-on question, the three of you can kind of talk a bit about why this particular William Blake work.
Yeah, so I'll really briefly touch on the Vastari side. So we were part of Microsoft Ventures Accelerator back in 2014. And even back then, there were some other companies within our cohort that were experimenting with blockchain and distributed ledger technology. And we've always thought that there was some promise there for the art world. So then when there was this huge boom in 2017 with the initial coin offerings that were very popular, actually, which Tezos had one, was an ICO back in 2017. There was a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of fraud. And it can then taint the entire technology with a terrible brush if you only hear those terrible stories. So you need to be critical, but also open to what the potential is of this technology. So we spoke to Christie's back in January 2018 and said, can we organize an educational outreach about blockchain technology for the arts, so that people can wrap their heads around it and understand what it is, etc. And you were there at the result of that, which was the first Art and Tech Summit exploring blockchain in July 2018. And we had museums there as well. We had artists, we had auction house professionals, we had technologists, and it's really interesting to see how this has evolved 3 years later. One of the panels specifically was about NFTs before they were called NFTs. It was about art on the blockchain and how potentially this could become, could be traded. And it was definitely, you had NFTs from Super Rare there. You had the founder of Larva Labs there, one of the founders. So, I mean, it was all happening there. And I think it's really inspiring to see that maybe it's not evolving exactly how we expected, but it's actually the brains of everyone coming together that then makes something happen. And similarly, we're here 2 years before the economics, the Blockbuster exhibition. So much could happen in the 2 years with these NFTs and whatever might occur with them, and maybe they'll end up becoming worthless. Maybe they'll end up becoming super valuable. If that is part of the project, is exploring that.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think a lot of times I talk about NFTs as being like the equivalent to the internet during the screechy modem days. So I think part of people's frustration when they come to NFTs is that a lot of things haven't been figured out yet, and it's not, you know, necessarily fully baked out, which is thrilling and exciting to people that want to experiment with new technologies, and maybe a little bit more off-putting to people that assumed that everything had already been put into place, you know, already. So I think we're still on that ride, and it's neat to see the Whitworth become part of it. So the choice of the William Blake work, maybe a little, because obviously the Whitworth has, you know, many works in their collection. I'm sure folks would love to hear a bit about how that selection process was made.
Poppy, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a couple of reasons why we chose that. So yeah, the NFT is a new visual reading of a very famous work in our collection, which is The Ancient of Days by the English artist William Blake. And you know, I'm sure many of you are familiar, but you know, Blake was a prolific poet and painter and printmaker, and he was known for his experimental approaches to image making techniques and for his use of a particular type of print making method that extended the circulation of his imagery. And The Ancient of Days in particular was an image that Blake first painted in 1794. And he repeatedly returned to this image, redrawing it and repainting it for the rest of his life until his death in 1827. So already you can get a sense of like how this sort of, for us, we're starting to speak to the kind of this emerging technology of NFTs and the experimental potential that they carry for making and, you know, rethinking the circulation of visual culture. And, you know, and as I said, Blake, you know, worked with this particular method of relief printing. So it enabled him to make multiple impressions of his writing and of his drawing. So it had in it this intention that's in the very making for these materials and these images to widely be distributed. But within that, within this kind of this idea of duplication is this sort of the trace of the artist's hand. So you have, what Blake did was he hand coloured, as Bernadine mentioned before, he hand coloured his prints. So there's a number of images of Ancient of Days in public and private collections, and each one is kind of distinctive. And so this combination, I guess, of a duplicated image with unique traces within it, again, you know, felt conceptually, you know, resonated with the idea of NFTs using the blockchain to kind of make you know, an image distinctive, and through authentication that, you know, presents it, you know, prevents it from being widely reproduced, I guess, in some ways. So this was a really interesting starting point. But within the image itself, the subject matter is of a mythological figure called Urizen. I don't know if people can remember the image that we saw earlier, but it's a figure that's created by Blake, and it's sort of like a godlike figure that's holding this instrument of measurement over the world, over the universe. And the name Urizen comes from this the Greek verb meaning to limit. So there's this kind of tension around this figure of Urizen as a figure of order and control that is a kind of antithesis of creativity and imagination. So you know, we thought that, again, you know, it's an image that just kept speaking in different ways to some of the kind of thinking around NFT technology, and this, and also about the circulation and the control mechanisms around art and its production and in its circulation. So that's why we, you know, we wanted to work with a kind of very familiar image from our collection, and that, so, you know, the William Blake one seemed like a great image to work with for various ways. But what we didn't want to do was just make a straight reproduction of it. And we thought about how might we interpret that image as an NFT file, and we thought about animating it. We thought about working with designers or artists to kind of reinterpret it. And then we decided, actually, really thinking about being a museum, entering into this, why don't we think about how we can, you know, what type of image creation we can generate from the museum, from the expertise and software and equipment within the museum. So essentially, this image that we have, which is made through multispectral imaging software, which is used through reading the image through different wavelengths of light, from infrared to UV. This is something that comes out of, you know, the expertise, the research expertise that are held in cultural institutions like our own. So we worked with colleagues from the John Wylands Research Institute and Library, the imaging team there. So they support all the research and conservation around all the university's collections. So it felt like that was actually a kind of, you know, again, it sort of embedded the whole concept, like within the particular context of the museum. And it also has a nod to those, as Bernadine said, those hidden expertise that that actually, you know, through years of funding cuts to the sector are, you know, have been depleted, and have been depleted even further through the economic impact of the pandemic. So, you know, for me, there's also a, you know, a nod to kind of remind, you know, the importance of that research into a kind of cultural or visual culture.
No, I appreciate that. And I think it's interesting that you selected a work that has been reproduced many times and sort of comes in editions. And it makes me think about sort of your choice of edition size. So, you know, I think it was mentioned earlier, the Uffizi chose to do a 1 of 1. And I think that can impact how much you have to charge and who can afford to buy it. And, you know, how were you all thinking when you chose, you know, how large to make the edition size, and who would you think of as potentially the audience for these NFTs? Maybe share a little bit about that.
I'm happy to weigh in a little bit. Or Alistair, do you want to talk about maybe first
why don't I start, and then you can I'll pass the baton.
I'll add whatever.
Yeah. But I mean, certainly from my perspective, I think it was important that this wasn't totally exclusive. Obviously, we've seen the behavior of this particular art world where you have the extremities of people, and then you have, like, you know, my kids, you know, buying and exchanging these things like stamps or football cards. So in a way, it was sort of trying to pitch it in a place where where generating the income was still a core part of the idea, but that it also wasn't out of reach. So in a way, creating an edition of around 50, in a way, allowed a sort of a price which was kind of commensurate with similar art editions that museums produce. So we you know, the Whitworth, like many other institutions, produce, you know, limited edition art prints or multiples which sell for a similar kind of price. But also that, in a way, because this is an experiment, I think a one-off NFT to a single individual wouldn't have provided the range of data and the range of stories that a number such as, you know, around 50 would create. So in a way, what we've got in terms of creating the content for the exhibition, we have 50 stories that will then unfold into the world. Some people may keep it and keep it forever. Some people may sell and sell and sell and sell again. So in a way, you have that diversity of data that can again give us a better picture of the behavior of this market and the behavior of this art world that will be more informative, I think, to other museums, to us as an institution. And in reality, probably a more reasonable way to generate income for social projects, which isn't dependent on, like, the super rich end of the market. It's a way people can kind of invest in the idea of a museum and its social outcomes without necessarily breaking the bank. Although we are also clear that because of the neighborhood that we're in as a gallery, this is still a lot of money for a lot of people. And we're conscious of that, and we gave it a lot of thought. But in the end, this is not for everybody to buy. This is for people. This is for collectors. This is for people who are kind of involved in the helter-skelter of what's going on, but is a mechanism in which we can kind of open up the debate around what art is, what museums are for, and open up a channel to a conversation, which I think NFTs are doing in a way that perhaps traditional forms of art are not. I mean, for example, all my kids know what NFTs are. If you go down the street into Moss Side, some of those diverse neighborhoods, they'll be more aware of NFTs than they will be of William Blake. So in a way, it's a kind of creating a portal between different cultures that was a consideration.
And I think we haven't actually published the price anywhere yet. We've alluded to it many times, but given the fluctuations of cryptocurrency and all of the complexities of putting together this edition, we hadn't published the price yet, but we can officially say that it will be going for sale on the 28th of July for 999 tezos, which is roughly the equivalent of £2,000 if you look at the average price of tezos over the past few months. It fluctuates all the time, so maybe people will find a moment when it's a really good deal or try and move it around, but that's part of the experimental nature of working with cryptocurrencies. And as Alistair said, around £2,000 is an investment, but it is accessible to a larger amount of people than £170,000. And I think that we did have a limitation to think about, which was who already has cryptocurrencies and who is interested in collecting NFTs in the first place. It's not hugely widespread. So with an addition of 10,000, it might have been more difficult to make sure that it's all sells, whereas an addition of 50 is still something that we feel confident might find an owner. Famous last words, we'll see if all 50 get sold, but we think that's a realistic size of addition.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think as the technology gets easier to use and the costs start to go down, it'd be great to see these edition sizes just get larger and larger so that, it could be even more and more participatory with the community. But I think there are some restrictions that are more sort of tech-based too as well at this point. So given that there are a lot of museums on, I want to get to some questions, but I also want to ask, what are some things maybe you feel like you've learned from this process if you were to talk to other museums and maybe things that they might want to think about, either, things that weren't well or things that maybe didn't go as well, or, pitfalls that others might be able to avoid. Any sort of advice for other museums before we get into some of the questions?
From my perspective, I think it's probably still too early to say. I think we've learned a lot. So we learned what the hell NFTs are to start with so far, and obviously we're in conversation with other institutions. There's a PhD researcher at the university already within the humanities department who's researching production of NFTs from Liverpool museums, and so we've brought them into the fold. We're working with an academic from the business school who's a senior lecturer in banking, who's involved. So in a way, this is very much an ongoing process. But certainly what I have learned is how to navigate a very fast-moving world, which is something that museums, as I said before, are not really attuned to. So yeah, we'll see how that pans out. Poppy, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I guess the one thing to add was something you touched on actually at the beginning, Jason, which is some of the kind of fear and apprehension that surround NFTs. And, within when we started thinking about this project, it was really important for us to listen to everybody, all our colleagues and all the concerns that everybody had, and lay them all out on the table and work through them one by one to the point where we knew that this is a really rapidly changing kind of, arena to kind of step into, and to kind of be vulnerable with that, be comfortable with that, but really making sure that everybody felt that their worries and their concerns were listened to, that, you know, and that we talked through them together. And we're still, as Alistair said, some of that's still, you know, unfolding. And but yeah, I think that was really important, probably more so than any other project. There's so many unknowns in this and so many shifting parts, that yes, it's definitely more less stable ground that we're perhaps used to be working on. But that's been brilliant. You know, it's been brilliant to kind of you know, to go along with that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can guarantee that there will be decisions we've made which in 2 years, 3 years time will say, oh, if only we'd done it that way. Like which platform to use, you know, the edition size, but you know, all those things you can guarantee it, but there's no way, I mean, as we know, there's no way of forecasting this at all. So we just have to embrace it.
Yeah, I think that's part of the fun, right? It's like the early web days too, right? You know, you're getting in early, and you know, you have to kind of build the project around those assumptions. So there are a couple of questions that came in through the chat that I'll kind of try to combine together. A few folks on more technical questions were asking, like, well, why not Ethereum, and is Tezos going to be around for a while, you know? And you know, I think maybe we can talk a little bit to the choice of the blockchain platform. I don't want to get super nerdy, but there were also some IPFS questions in there, so I think we can hit some of those because I think it's not just a nerdy tech question; it has implications socially too. So maybe let's just take it in the form of why not Ethereum? That's sort of a well-known platform.
Yeah, I mean, we did, obviously we considered Ethereum, and we took a long time to deliberate. In fact, we had quite a large discussion in the gallery amongst the team about this. And in the end, we did feel that whilst Ethereum was the main platform and where the kind of heat of the market was, because of environmental concerns, we chose to go with Tezos, and we knew that Ethereum was developing a proof of stake rather than proof of work, but that wasn't guaranteed. And we thought we should stick by our convictions and go with Tezos. And also, I suppose, you know, as a museum, you know, museums have convening power. They oftentimes they are in the world of perhaps thought leadership. And we thought, well, maybe, you know, if we start working with Tezos, maybe we can kind of push the market this way as well, and to say, actually, you know, there are some principles here about choosing more environmentally, you know, ethical platforms rather than just going with where the big money is. You know, that may be a decision down the line we regret, and we say, oh, yeah. Ethereum went to proof of stake, but at the moment we decided we didn't want to take that risk, and that we thought Tezos was the preferred option here. Poppy, if you got anything on that?
No, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. Bernadine alluded to it earlier, but I've been working on this Green NFTs initiative, and you know, it's not necessarily specific to any one blockchain. Part of it's trying to drive Ethereum faster to proof of stake, which would be a greener way to make NFTs. And in the meantime, most of my collecting has been on Tezos, and I think a lot of artists are moving to that platform for that reason. There were some questions around storage and IPFS that get pretty nerdy. That's a topic that I love, but real quick, high level, the image is stored across multiple computers on something called IPFS, which stands for Interplanetary File System. And yes, someone does have to pay to keep those files stored. Usually it's the platform typically that pays for it, but collectors can use things like Pinata to try to sort of take control over the pinning themselves of that those media files and IPFS. But yeah, that's, if you want to talk about IPFS, find me on Twitter, because I'll talk about IPFS forever. I have deep thoughts about that. Other questions?
And, Jason, I wanted to add something there. I do think
Sure.
that there are many museums on the call. I think this is conceptually an area that's really interesting for museums, about this kind of permanence and archiving of digital assets that are then referenced. I think museums have a part to play in that story of that permanence and that storing of those assets. Currently, it's all these startups and foundations that have roots in blockchain that have developed these tools, often to combat fake news. And so I think that there are a lot of mission-driven angles to IPFS, Arweave, all of these perma web storage providers that link to the mission of many museums.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would say that collectors should look deeply into how things are being stored and who's paying for them. Because when we had sort of the early, before we were calling them NFTs in late 2017, early 2018, some of those platforms did go away and collectors like me did lose their NFTs, right? Because I wasn't as educated about them. So yeah, I think it's smart for folks to look into that. So we've got a question here. Does anyone know of a contemporary art museum collecting NFTs for their collection? So it's interesting that the Whitworth is putting out an NFT, but have you considered at any point maybe purchasing NFTs for part of the collection, or have you heard of any other museums that might be looking into that?
Yeah, it's definitely something that is now, something that's kind of we're discussing and looking forward to. I mean, yeah, as a future of collecting NFTs. And, as accredited museums, you have a collection policy and you have to have, you sign up to kind of particular practices around the conservation and storage and access of what comes into your collection. And we're not there yet for this type of work, but that's something that I think this project has really brought to the foreground. So yeah, and actually to your answer, I don't know anywhere that's collected it yet, other than
I actually spoke to a museum director last week at the ICA Miami that also was just mentioned on the chat, who was a CryptoPunk was donated to the museum. And there are many museums who have collected art on the blockchain, not necessarily NFTs. And sometimes those are linked to actual hardware or cold storage wallets. So there is a history there, but I think that taking part in the marketplace is a little bit of the contentious thing. It's almost like writing a policy on how you buy at Christie's and Sotheby's. How do you feel comfortable buying at these marketplaces?
And in a way, I think that that's one of the most exciting aspects of this. Is for a long time we've always not considered the market and the object of art in the same breath, which of course they always have been. So, and I think this is, NFT becomes this total synthesis of currency and art, which makes it a very interesting place. And we're working out how to do it. I think one of the interesting things that will unfold is us doing this project, and Miami taking work into their collection. We have to find our way around how to do this, how to collect this, in the same way that when Joseph Beuys was making fat sculptures, or when art took these turns down the line, the museum sector had to adapt and rethink its collections policies and rethink its conservation strategies, and we will have to do the same here as well with digital art. It may well be there will be 100, 200 years from now there will be NFT archaeology museums who are sort of trying to rediscover lost works from platforms that we thought had disappeared forever. So yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, bring on the complexity.
Yeah, it may not take hundreds of years. I think we may see NFT archaeologists in months, actually. I mean, with the prices going up like they have around some of these early NFTs and the difficulty in accessing some of the earlier ones, I think it makes sense. Well, I know we're coming up to the top of the hour. Maybe sort of last question would be, thoughts on where you progress from, this moving forward. So obviously, we are sort of just at the beginning of this project, but other thoughts on how you might think about using NFTs, whether it's turning other objects within the museum into NFTs to keep them, just on file digitally, or to share them or loan them out to other organizations, or just anything that you want to share about how you're thinking about NFTs moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it sheds. Apart from what we've been discussing, it sheds a light on actually authentication of digital art as a whole. A lot of the film works that we acquire now from established moving image artists are digital files, and the preservation and conservation of those works is an open-ended question. And maybe the blockchain and and this sphere can add something for the longevity of works like that. I'm also interested from a philanthropic point of view, is I do see potential for this if we can get it right, to offer a kind of grassroots form of philanthropy for museums. Jason, at the start, you started by saying you loved museums growing up, and a lot of people feel like that. But in a way, how can we finance them that doesn't rely on dirty money, large-scale corporations, slightly suspect philanthropists. Is this a way we could actually democratize the funding of museums in an interesting way, where people buy an NFT for 50p or $1 or whatever it is, but a million people do it, and that creates the resources for a much more collectivized and decentralized idea of supporting culture.
I actually think that's a pretty great spot to end. That's a great vision, that we could decentralize museum funding and give it back to the communities. I think it's a beautiful vision. So for folks that want to see the William Blake NFT, can we put the URL into the chat? And then I think they can also get to it from the Vastari site. Yep, as well. There we go. And I'd like to thank, well, first of all, thank Bernadine for taking the risk of letting me be the moderator today. I love these webinars and have been a guest once or twice before, so hopefully I haven't messed it up so badly that I don't get invited back. And of course, thank you to Alistair and Poppy from the Whitworth, both for being on the podcast, but honestly, as someone who's passionate about art and tech, I'm just really thankful and grateful that you guys have taken some risk, honestly, here to try to do something new and different and thoughtful to help kind of push the use of tech in museums forward. So thanks again to everybody for joining. Have a nice day.
Yeah, thank you so
everybody.
much. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Bernadine. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you for having us.
Lovely.